Good evening, everyone. How are you? I hope everybody is doing great today. I'm going to give everybody a little bit of time to pop on in. And while we are waiting for people to join us, let's just get to know each other a little bit. All right. All right. Everybody may not know me. Many of you do, but let me go ahead and introduce myself, and then you guys can introduce yourself in the comments and I can get to know you. How about that? Does that sound good? So, for everybody who doesn't know me, Coach Tracey, I am a mindset mastery and empowerment coach that focuses on trauma healing for Black women. And I work with them to be able to fearlessly and unapologetically love everything about themselves, from their full lips to their full hips, to the way we talk, to the way we walk, our swag, everything. And in doing so, and while doing so, healing from various types of trauma, from generational trauma, childhood trauma, and of course, the historical trauma. All right. Hey, everybody. So before we get started, again, I want to tell you guys, I am streaming on a couple of different places. I'm streaming from StreamYard. So if you are on Facebook, please give StreamYard permission to see your information so that I can actually see your comments and hopefully your name, so I can actually speak to you friend to friend, person to person, sister to sister, brother to brother. All right. All right. All right. So I'm also streaming on Instagram as well as YouTube, and in my private Facebook group, Unapologetically Me. If you have not joined the private Facebook group, please do so. I will make sure the information is in the comments so that you can do so at the end of our session. All right. But it is a private group for Black women. It is a supportive community of like-minded sisters who are on their healing and self-discovery journey. It's a place where we support each other, we lift each other up, we hold each other accountable, we make that thing happen, all right? Because we love it on each other. Healing is not linear. It's not something that needs to be done 100% by yourself either. Of course, you are responsible for your healing, but it makes it so much sweeter, so much easier, and so much faster when you are doing it in community. And y'all know I am all about community. Hey, hey, hey. A few people on Instagram. Thank you guys for joining me. Yes. While we're waiting, why don't everybody tell me where you are joining from? Y'all, I am in Maryland. I'm in Southern Maryland, but y'all know I'm a Southern girl at heart, right? I'm from South Carolina. So if I have any South Carolinians there in the place, let a sister know. Let a sister know. Gotta have my tea. Y'all like that mug, right? Live it, love it, own it. That's what we're going to do with our lives. We're going to live it, we're going to love it, and we're going to own it, every bit of it. We got Chesapeake, Virginia, Kensington, Maryland, Denver, Colorado, New York City, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. See where else we got some folks from. UK. Hey, thank you for joining me. All right. Columbia, Maryland, Northern New York, near Canada. That's one of my places I want to go once we're able to go. All right. Oh my goodness, so many lives. Oh, I had no idea Tuesdays were that busy for lives. I noticed that as well. Oh, we got some folks from Facebook from Tampa. That's actually my baby girl. We have someone else that said good evening. I don't know their name. It just says Facebook user, but thank you so much for joining me. So it's about 5 minutes into it. So we're going to get started. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, you probably have heard the story about imposter syndrome in my life. And I'm going to preface starting it with the story about me and my experience with imposter syndrome. But before I tell you about it, let me define what imposter syndrome is. Imposter syndrome is it actually was coined in 1978 by two women doctors, Dr. Pauline Rose Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes. They coined it. It was at the time imposter phenomenon, but over time it has evolved to be called imposter syndrome. Now, I had no idea what imposter syndrome was until I moved from South Carolina to Virginia. And I took a sales opportunity with a technology company, a major Fortune 500 technology company. Now, I thought I had prepared myself for working amongst pretty much a white male dominated industry. Sales is pretty much dominated by men, right? By males, and white males at that. So I thought I had, armed myself and was prepared. I've always been very, very confident. I've always been assured of myself. I've always, held my own. And I thought I was good to go. I will never forget when I walked in the first day. I walked in and I had big hair, and everyone was looking like, who is this woman? I could hear the silence. I could hear the whispers, and all around in the office, I was looking for people that looked like me, of course, because the person that had turned me on to the position was actually a brother. So I was looking for more people that looked like me, but there weren't many. I can probably count them on my hand how many people who looked like me that were in the office, 5, 6, including myself, right? I did not expect to feel the feelings that I felt when I was there. Thank God there were a couple of people there who I could go to and talk to about what I was feeling. I was anxious quite a bit. I was extremely stressed because, one, I was the new kid on the block. 2, I was the only woman. Actually, I was the second woman in sales that was also African American. So there was only 2 women who were women of color, Black women that were in the entire sales team in that particular location. So not a lot of people that looked like me. Before long, I started feeling excluded. I started feeling as if everything I was doing was being monitored. It was being watched. And I started feeling very closed in. And as a result, I actually started closing in and going inward, and holding everything in, so much so that I was so stressed that I lost, I don't know how much weight. I was much, much smaller than I am now. I was actually down to probably like a size 2, and I've always usually been like a size 4 or a size 6, but it was an unhealthy weight loss because it happened pretty quickly. So that was my experience with it, where I was doubting my own capabilities, even though I was kicking butt. And the reason why I was doubting myself was because I was being questioned all the time. What are you doing? Where are you going? Who are you talking to? How are you doing? And so forth and so on. So that was my first experience with it. And I started doing some research and learned that this is a issue that really happens with a lot of women, white, Asian, women, just across the board. But it also does happen with some men. But for the most part, this particular syndrome was actually denoted to be amongst women. Now, I'm going to start it by saying, first and foremost, when I first saw the words imposter, I was like, I'm nobody's imposter. I really took offense to it. I'll be honest, because nobody wants to be called an imposter. And it felt a little, I would say, criminal. It felt criminal, like I'm an imposter. Because when you think of an imposter, you think of someone who has done something that's, criminal, an activity that's, not kosher, you go to jail for it. So I was a little taken aback by that in the first place. And then the fact that it said syndrome, I was like, am I going to have this forever? I mean, I don't want to feel this way forever. So I was a little taken back by that. And I think when many women see the name imposter syndrome, I would think that most of us are taken aback by the fact that it's called imposter syndrome. So I want to peel back a little bit of the layers. But before I get started, if you've ever dealt with imposter syndrome, please let me know in the comments. And if you don't mind sharing, if it's something that you're currently dealing with, if you've dealt with it in the past, if you know someone who has dealt with imposter syndrome. If that is the case, just put a 1 in the comments, if you will. Okay, and I'm going to take a sip of my tea because I'm a little thirsty. And thank you guys for joining. If you have any questions or any feedback, particularly if you are on Instagram, please use the little question box so that at the end I can come back and answer your questions and give you my thoughts, and we can have a dialogue. Okay? All right. So here's the thing about imposter syndrome. I've identified some of the feelings that come up when you are feeling like, an imposter. Exactly, Liz. The language is even intimidating. Oh my gosh. But here's some of the feelings. And I think the biggest feeling that many of us feel, if you've ever experienced imposter syndrome, is the feeling of not being enough, not being good enough, inadequate. That was a big one for me. And again, I have always been very, very confident. So for me to feel that disconnected with myself was very disconcerting for me. Another feeling that I felt was I felt fear. I felt fear of being pointed out, fear of someone finding something that just wasn't perfect, that wasn't right. Not so much that it wasn't, that I didn't know, but it wasn't right, making a mistake. I was very much being in a perfectionist mode. And I'm already critical enough of myself because I loved and must do a great job in my mind. I've just always been that way. So I didn't need that added pressure, which imposter syndrome puts on you. So you're walking around with this heavy burden of anxiety and stress. Another one might be, and which is how I felt after some time, I felt like I didn't belong. I never felt very comfortable in that position. Although I did very well, I always met my quotas. I made a decent income, but I never quite felt like I fit in, if that makes any sense. Yes. I never felt like I fit in. And I also felt excluded to some degree. Because remember, I was in sales. It was male dominated. It was predominantly Caucasian. So I wasn't invited to the events a lot of times. Granted, I'm not a big drinker. So even though I always attempted to be a team player by showing up and maybe getting something like a Shirley Temple or something, make it look like I'm drinking something. Or I might have gotten a drink, but I still felt excluded. So that may be some feelings that you may have experienced as part of imposter syndrome. If you've experienced any of those, please send up a 2 in the comments and let me know that you actually experienced some of those feelings. Okay. And while you all are doing that, I'm going to share some of the things and how imposter syndrome will actually show up in your work life, and even talk about a little bit about how it may spill over into the other parts of your life. Because remember, what you do well in one part of your life, you're going to do well in another part of your life. And what you don't do so well in one part of your life, you're not going to do so well in the other parts of your life. So we're pretty consistent with that as humans. All right, Zen Black Mama and PBIN Planning and Exclusively You and Successful Failure over on Instagram, they felt those feelings of not being adequate, not being good enough, being found out, if you will. Here's how imposter syndrome shows up for many of us. If you can relate to this, just send up some hearts, okay? First thing is, many of us, we will procrastinate because we are afraid of making a mistake. We're afraid of not doing it right. We're afraid of all of the things, right? If we're not procrastinating, we're more than likely being a perfectionist. We can't get the project done because we're trying to make sure it's perfect. Wait, I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this. Oh, no, wait, this T needs to be crossed and this I needs to be dotted. We are wearing ourselves out trying to make it perfect, right? Another way is you have a hard time delegating. Now, you would think that delegating would be a great thing for us, but not when you are in fear of being found out or in fear of making a mistake, because you already feel as if you are being censored, if you already feel that you are being critiqued, you already feel like you are on the hot seat all the time. So it's going to be very hard to delegate, because if I delegate it, I can't make sure that it's being done the right way. And I certainly do not want someone coming at me because I made a mistake. So I got to protect my own self at all costs. So I certainly cannot give this to someone else to do. Flying under the radar, just breezing through. You know what? As long as I can keep my head down, keep my nose clean, keep my hands clean, I'm going to fly up under this radar, because, as long as I can do this, I'm not going to be found out. Nobody will ever know that, I'm really not as good as I say I am. I'm really not that great. Anybody can relate to that? Yeah. Also, some of the things that's going to show up, and you may not even realize that you had it, but actually I'm going to wait and talk about these, because these are the things that are actually part of some of the traumatic parts of it that we don't necessarily always talk about. And before I get into talking about the how imposter syndrome actually shows up from a traumatic perspective, whether it's generational, historical, or even from childhood trauma and so forth, if you think you may be triggered, please, please, please remove yourself from the live. The last thing I want to do is to harm anyone, because my goal is to help. So please, 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 if you think you're going to be triggered, I'm not going to be talking about any type of events or anything like that. However, it could still be triggering for someone, okay? Just to preface it with that. Now let's talk about what happens when you are dealing with imposter syndrome. Oh, Successful Failure 3, she states on Instagram, I think I'm great. I just hate to when I mess up. And that's a tough part, because if something happens, it comes back on us, and we have to accept the total responsibility. And that's really, really tough. Here is what imposter syndrome does to women. And then I'm going to talk specifically about Black women shortly. But in all women, this is what it does to us. It prevents us from showing up fully, our true selves, with ourselves and in the world. And when that happens, we are actually negating the gifts our purpose. We're not able to fully actually walk in those and own those things. So if we're not able to show up at work fully in our career, we're also taking the frustration, the anxiety, the stress, the feelings of not being good enough, the feelings of fear, the feelings of shame. We're taking those also into our family dynamics. We're taking them into relationships, whether platonic or even romantic relationships. We are not able to be fully present even on the job because our environment is preventing us from doing so. The other interesting thing about imposter syndrome, what I learned through learning more about it, is that imposter syndrome, it can attack, if you will, you at any level of your um, career. You can be starting out, you could be the owner of the company. Um, Even our First Lady, Michelle Obama, mentioned that she had combated imposter syndrome. Charlize Theron, also a beautiful actress, has combated imposter syndrome. So when we think about these women who are in these extraordinary positions, who have these extraordinary minds, people with doctorates who have the body of proof, if you will, to prove that they are exceptional, are still dealing with the feelings of fear of being a fraud, if you will. And again, I really don't, the connotation of the word imposter, fraud, particularly with women, is very, very troubling for me. I would love to see that change to something else. To be quite honest, I would like to not even see this be something that we're dealing with, and I'll tell you why. Imposter syndrome. Ayana, if you'll put your question in the box, I will get to it because I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. I think I'm going to answer that question as I continue on in the live. The thing about imposter syndrome is we will continue to show up, and we work and we work and we work. It doesn't matter if you give it your all or if you give it just enough to fly up under the radar. It's going to always give you evidence of you being an imposter. And that's what's the harsh and the scary and the tricky part about imposter syndrome is that it's going to turn anything that we do into evidence against us. Right? So if that's the case, how do we combat imposter syndrome when if something comes easy to us, if we work our buns off, if something comes hard to us and we beat ourselves up one side and down the other, if something is difficult, regardless, we're still going to think we're not good enough. And the funny part of it is that imposter syndrome doesn't necessarily show up in all areas of our life. It can show up in certain areas of our life. Those areas where, and we're going to talk about the environment. I'm going to talk about a little bit why it doesn't show up in all areas in just a moment. I promise I'm coming back to it. If I forget, which I'm doubt that I will, bring me back to it, okay? The thing about it is imposter syndrome, when you think about where it comes from, and I do have my notes, guys, so if you see me flipping my paper over, it is rooted in various forms of things such as biases, oppression, systemic racism, and white supremacy. And there are some parts of it that are also rooted in generational trauma. And that's where I want to talk about how trauma, it shows up as trauma, and how it shows up for Black women specifically. Okay. When we think about not feeling good enough, when we think about the fear, when we think about the shame, the feelings of inadequacy, much of the time, we have to think about the environment that this is actually typically happening in, and that is our work environments. As we all know, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, hasn't been, something that many companies actually talk the talk and walk the walk. Can we agree on that? So if that is the case, what's happened and why many women, and especially Black women, feel as if they are combating or dealing with imposter syndrome, it is because of the various biases, the various microaggressions, the gaslighting, the oppression that's actually in the work environment in corporate America. And let's talk about that. And what does that look like? I can tell you what it looked like for me. And if you can relate to that, drop it in the comments what you had to deal with, if you can relate with it. We deal with the marginalization because many of us who have these positions, many of us are telling ourselves, or we are hearing it from others, that the reason why we are in these positions are not because of our skill set, not because of our abilities, not because of our education, not because of our academic abilities. It's because of tokenism. Some of us have been told that we're only in these positions because of affirmative action. Some of us have been told we're only in those positions because we need to fill a slot. And when you are hearing these type of things in your work environment, that can put a damper on how you think about yourself. It's tough, especially when you are a Black woman, to hear that the only reason that you have gotten this particular position is because they had to fill a slot. And I want to write this off on my taxes. I want to make sure that I stay in compliance. Versus, we value diversity. We value inclusion. We value equity. And you are a valued team member, and we want to pour into you. We want to see you be successful. That is very, very tough. So when you are dealing with those type of biases, and those biases aren't necessarily just coming from your peers, but they're coming from the people that are supposed to be actually help to make the work environment better and safe and equitable for everyone. For instance, your HR department, because you can't go to your HR department and have the hard conversations because you may be gaslighted or you may be a victim of tone policing. How is it that you're not feeling like you don't belong? Those feelings and those types of actions toward us, when we have experiences, when our experiences are negated because we are Black. And I'm going to be straight up real with you. What happened to me when I went to someone to have that conversation, the conversation came back to me that says that I was angry. I was upset, to calm down. We can't have this conversation until you calm down. And I wasn't loud. I was passionate about how I was feeling because I was feeling unheard. I was feeling unseen. And by the reactions of the person that I was speaking to, I could tell that I was not being received the way that I needed to be received. So in those instances, we have an environment that exacerbates the feelings of not being enough, otherness, not belonging, right? So what happens is our confidence level decreases because now we have not only been oppressed, if you will, our voice has been censored and silenced. when we were in our HR department, which is where we're supposed to be able to go when we have grievances. If we can't have that conversation with our managers and so forth, who are we to talk to? So you can see how we can start to feel this way, that we are imposters, or again, that word just bothers me, how we can start to go within ourselves and start to withdraw and start to wonder, am I good enough for this? Okay. And here's the other part that we also have to think about. All of those things are rooted in what we talked about: the oppression, the systemic racism, white supremacy, and so forth. And I'll give you another example of how, when you're in a position of power, I had a job where I was a manager. I was working with a private insurance agency, and I was over all of the salespeople who happened to be white males, right? I had an instance where I was working myself to the bone because, of course, I needed to make sure that I made it. One, because I was the only African American, I was the only woman. And when you are the first, that's an added pressure for Black women when you are the first at a company. Okay. So I had to make it, because in order for other women of color, other people of color, other Black people, other Black men and women to be able to come into this company and have opportunities, I needed to make sure that the foundation was laid. So that was an added pressure on me. One that I gladly carried, of course, but it was added pressure, right? But what I came up against was race. One of the people that was reporting to me, if you will, their activities, was very, very uncomfortable with me being their superior, if you will, being over them. And they brought up the subject of race. And that was the only elephant in the room. Well, here's the thing. What I didn't know was that it was a problem with the powers that be. And as a result, I was fired because I made him uncomfortable. Can you see how traumatic that was? I was fired because I made a white male uncomfortable, because I was his superior and he would not talk to me. And the only reason that he wouldn't talk to me was because I was a Black woman. Those are valid reasons to feel that you don't belong, and maybe even that we're not enough. But the reason why we don't feel like we're enough is because of oppression, systemic racism, white supremacy. We don't not feel that we're not enough. We don't feel that we're not good enough. We don't feel that we cannot do it. We don't feel that we are not smart enough because we just simply don't believe that about ourselves. We believe we are feeling that way because of, again, the microaggressions, the biases, the things that are actually in place because we weren't meant to be in those places in the first place. So if those things are not addressed, so that there is diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, then of course, we're going to actually start to have some of these feelings, because we are the othered in most cases, right? Is everybody still with me? Now let's talk about how generational trauma can also cause us to feel the imposter syndrome effects of not being good enough, not being smart enough, not belonging, and also how it can actually cause us to be procrastinators, perfectionists, not easy to delegate things to other people. I don't know if you've read the book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joyce DeGraw. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but it's an awesome book that I would encourage anyone to read if you want to learn more about how generational trauma and also historical trauma affects the Black community. And one of the things that I thought was really, really interesting, and I've seen it in various TV shows when we're talking about and we see slavery, is when slaves were in the field, particularly mothers and fathers, and their children were small. The master or the slave masters or the people, whomever was over them, may have had their eye on their children, because as the children became older, they became laborers, they became slaves, they were working, they were put to work. So in the fields and in the house, if you will, if a mother or a father happened to see that their child was being eyed by the slave owner, the master, or whomever, the foreman, whatever you call them, they would immediately say things like, oh, nah, he's docile, he's not smart, she's not smart, she's not smart. Those are things that were done during slavery to keep the children protected. The problem is we didn't stop doing that as a culture. And I'll give you a perfect example. Have you ever been at a class or school function with your children, and one parent is a white mom or an Asian mom or another person of color is singing the praises of your children, right? And you talk to a Black mother. This is not always the case. This has happened. I've seen it happen. So this is not always the case. But what happens is the white mother or the other mother who is not of Black origin is talking and singing the praises. Oh, little Johnny, he is doing great. I am so proud of him. He has really excelled with his ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. And I know he's going to do really great with the other thing when they start adding multiplication and blase this and blase that, right? Well, the Black mother, and I have seen this, and I didn't understand it at the time, but as a learning and growing in my profession, I recognized what it was. The Black mother says, oh, yeah, little Rodney, he's doing well, but if I could just get him to make his bed up. Lord have mercy, that boy, he drives me nuts not making his bed up. How do you get Johnny to make his bed up? Do you see what just happened? The Black mother was not able to give her son the same type of praise. She had to downplay it by showing something that he was not doing well. When you hear this as a child, can you imagine how it affects your self-worth? Even though our worth is set from the moment we are conceived in God's mind, our worth is set, but we don't know that. But can you see how devastating that can be for a Black child, a Black woman, and how it could be traumatic, and how that experience, because when you're at home, mom is singing your praises and she's so proud of you and she's giving you all the aid, she's giving high fives and fist bumps and you're great, everything's great. But when you're around someone else, you don't get the accolades. So there's a bit of confusion there. So we didn't leave that practice of protecting our children in the slave fields. And that is one way that generational trauma is passed on and passed on. And it's up to us to break that generational cycle. Does that make sense? If you're still with me, if you understand this, if this is making sense to you, please send me some hearts up so that I'll know that you're still with me. All right. Another thing that I know growing up, especially as children, but especially as a girl, we were taught to be seen and not heard. Little girls were taught to be prim and proper. We were taught to be quiet. We were taught to be ladylike. We were taught to not be too loud. We were taught to be grateful for what we receive. We were taught to be independent, but not too independent. We were taught don't toot your own horn, be a good girl. Can anybody relate to that? If you can relate to that, please let me know in the comments. Please let me know in the comments. And when we are fed those type of comments, that's what we were taught. That those things are a part of generational trauma. Those are the things that we have passed on from generation to generation to generation. What we learn, what we live, right? And we're not beating up our parents, not at all. Our parents did the best that they could do with what they knew. And that's why it's up to us to break these generational cycles. So when we know better, we can do better, right? So if you've heard these types of things, when you go into the corporate workplace, and you also have to deal with oppression, systemic racism, white supremacy, the various biases, the gaslighting, the tone policing, all of these things, and they're compounded. Is it no wonder that imposter syndrome weighs so heavily on the Black woman? Because we're not simply dealing with the biases and the lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion inside the workplace. We are also dealing with the other levels of things, the traumatic things that have been compounded on top of us. So we have to walk a much stricter line. Perfect example. Remember, I was talking to the HR person and she said that I was being angry, basically to calm down, that we couldn't have a conversation until I calmed down, right? Right? How often do you hear that being said of other women, white women, Asian women, other women, people of color? How often are they told that they are being angry? How often are they told that we're not going to have this conversation until you calm down? How often are they told that, at least I've not seen it. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but what I am saying that it is very, very common as a Black woman. And if you are a Black woman, you can attest to this, that we are told that when we are passionate, when our emotions are shown, that we're not being passionate, we're being angry. And on many occasions, I have seen it where someone has been belligerent, someone has been cursing, someone has been very disrespectful, and they were like, they're just being loud. They didn't mean it. So we have all of these things that we have to contend with. So that is why imposter syndrome is so much more difficult for women, of Black women, because we have to also contend with those things. Is everybody still with me? All right. Now I want to talk about a few things that we can do that can aid us in dealing with the imposter syndrome. And I'm not going to even call it imposter syndrome anymore, because really what it is that the environment is the imposter. Because the environment tells me that I'm going to be treated equally. The environment tells me that I'm going to be included. The environment tells me that I'm going to be safe. The environment tells me that I am worthy. It's supposed to tell me those things, but it's not. So the imposter is not me. It's not the women who have been told that they have been dealing with imposter syndrome. The environment is the imposter, because what happened is with imposter syndrome, they place all of the blame on the woman as if the problem is her. It's not us. Now, granted, we are all dealing with some things. We have some limiting beliefs, more than likely. We are always working on those things, hopefully. And granted, there may be the aspect of trauma, of course, generational trauma. But at the end of the day, the person is not the problem. The problem is the lack of change in the workplace, in the environment to accommodate and to accept differences. Not only to accept them, but to appreciate them, right? So here are some tools that I have used, and I actually share these tools with my clients to help them to combat those feelings of not being enough, those feelings of not being worthy, not being smart enough, not belonging. Okay. And that's the biggest one for me, is not belonging. And if you have questions, please do place them in the questions, and I will definitely come back to them. Hey, Maybell, how are you? You are so welcome, Ayana. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And she be plant crushing, very deep. It is deep when you think about it from that perspective. Zen Black Mama, the Rooted Peacock, Successful Failure. Thank you all so much. The Rooted Peacock says they have literally flipped out postal to hear that. Never, ever, not often at all. And they're responding to the comment of how often do we hear people of other races and cultures being said that they were being angry for being passionate. So here are some tools. The first one, and I love this one because it is your evidence. Build your body of proof so that when you are feeling inadequate, when you are feeling that you are not supposed to have the accolades that you've had, when it's hard for you to accept a compliment or praise at work, in the workplace. I do the Rooted Peacock, and I will get to that shortly. Thank you. Your body of proof is your degrees, the papers, the places that you've been published. Are you an author? Look at your book. Anything that gives you proof of the actual academics, the things that you have earned, that you went to school. But let me tell you something. I went to college, ladies and gentlemen. Nobody gave me my A's and B's. I worked really hard for those A's and B's, and nobody gave you your A's and B's either. You worked for those. You earned those A's and B's because you had the capacity and the ability to do so. So build your body of proof so that when you are feeling less than, you can go back and say, you know what? Yeah, I did that. I did that. Now, I will say this, that body of proof is not going to be the only thing that is going to help you get past that thought process. So there's 5 more things that we're going to talk about. The second one is develop and utilize a group of mentors and trusted advisors who you can actually talk to. You can be yourself 100%. And show up as you are and get the support, the guidance, and the constructive advice so that you can move past those feelings of inadequacy. So that you can also deal with those thoughts that are as a result of the generational trauma and also the historical trauma of oppression and systemic racism, white supremacy, and so forth, okay? You want to be able to call on them and discuss any of those concerns with them. So develop that group, that network, because sometimes we just need an external voice that can hear us and help us to really see the truth of the matter and see the truth of who we are. Okay. The third thing is when you are in those positions and you're working with a company whose work environment is not supportive of who you are as an individual contributor to your team and to the company's vision and mission, to start to seek out opportunities with those companies that not only talk the talk, but walk the walk with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes we have to remove ourselves from an environment to save ourselves. Does that make sense? All right. The next thing is make sure that you are not only implementing, but following some work standards that are going to prevent the burnout on you mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And that means shutting down at a reasonable time. That means not taking on the extra work. That means not going into work early all the time. That means setting up some standards and also setting up some boundaries so that you can protect your mental capacity, your emotional capacity, your physical and your spiritual capacity. Okay. Also, I believe in creating work-life harmony. I am not a believer in balance because there's going to always be something where something's going to get a little bit more attention than the other. So the scales are always going to be unbalanced. But I do like to seek work-life harmony, meaning if I have to give some attention to this particular event or this child or this place or thing, I'm okay with it because I realize that some things are going to need a little bit more attention, and I can come back over here and take care of this situation and not beat myself up about it and not get too stressed out about it. And that will minimize the stress that you put on yourself when things don't just go exactly the way you want or things seem a little bit out of sync. But guess what? You can just get back on the horse and just keep moving forward and just move around with that. But make sure you have good systems in place so that the harmony is continuous. I hope that helps. The last thing, well, not the last thing. The other thing is something that we are not taught as Black women, and that's to give ourselves grace and give ourselves the same compassion that we would give someone else who was in that situation. Many times we are speaking really harshly to ourselves because we don't understand why we are feeling the way that we're feeling. We don't understand why we can't get it right. We don't understand. And we know we wouldn't say those things to someone else normally, right? So I want to encourage you to give yourself the grace that you would give someone else and learn some self-compassion and give yourself a break. And remember that you have a lot riding on your shoulders. You have a lot to contend with. What that workplace environment is doing is not all on you. Most of that is on them. Now, accepting your own worth, that's on you, sister, but we're going to work through that too. And the last thing, and this is what will really, all of these things will help you, but a few of these things are really going to help you to focus on the worth, owning and reclaiming your worth and your value and your belonging. And that is secure an experienced coach or even a therapist who can help you manage your thoughts, understand the trauma, process the trauma so that you can start the healing and the self-discovery to truly reclaim your worth. Because remember, your worth was set in stone when you were even thought of in God's mind to be created. So that's never changed. Now, our value is something else. Our value is something that we can either increase or we can decrease it based on what we believe that we are worthy of. So if I believe that I am worthy of more, that's the value that I believe that I should be getting, but my worth never changed. If I don't believe that I'm worthy of more, if I believe that I'm only worthy of this, that's the value that I've placed on myself, or I've allowed someone else to place their perceived value on me. But your worth has never changed and will never change, but you can reclaim your worth. I hope that makes sense to you. And some other tools that I like to share with my clients also is, y'all know I am a big proponent of journaling, and I love affirmations and declarations. All right. They are very, very useful tools. They're very easy to use. Now, getting those thoughts out of your head, that's where the work comes in, but you can do it. I believe in you and I know that you can do it. So I'm going to give you a few journal prompts and I'm almost done. I promise. It's 4 journal prompts and I'm going to read them slowly. The first one is, What would you do if you could muster up the courage and you knew you were worthy? What would you do if you could muster up the courage and you knew you were worthy? And then I want you to answer that question a different way. What would you do if you could muster up the courage and you knew you belonged? Okay. The second one, how would you show up for yourself and the world if you knew that you were worthy and that you belonged? I'm going to say that again. How would you show up for yourself and the world if you knew that you were worthy and that you belonged? Powerful questions. And journaling is just going to pull those thoughts out of your head. I'm going to put them on paper, and it's going to allow you to process. It's going to allow you to see the truth of the matter, if you will. Third question, or journal prompt rather, write down all the reasons that you are worthy. Yeah. Write down all the reasons that you are worthy. And if you run out of reasons of what you are worthy of, I want you to just write, I am worthy. I am totally worthy. You better believe I'm worthy. Just keep writing, I am worthy. I am worthy. I am worthy. I am awesome. I am worthy of all good things. I am worthy. I am worthy. Just keep writing it. Just keep writing it. The last one, write down all the reasons that you belong. Yes, Maybelle is on Facebook. She says she's definitely going to write down all the reasons that make her worthy. I appreciate you all because it's been about an hour. Should have called this a masterclass, right? And the last thing I'm going to leave you all with is I think it's 5 affirmations that I believe. And if you cannot believe this about yourself, declare it over yourself. Affirmations means you are affirming it of yourself. This is what I believe about myself. And I know a lot of people have their own thoughts about affirmations, but I am a big believer in affirmations. If you can truly believe what you are saying about yourself, I don't believe in affirmations that's pie in the sky. I believe in realistic affirmations that you can truly believe about yourself. If you can't just yet believe this about yourself, declare it over for yourself. And I learned this from my good friend. Oh my goodness, I can't think of her name, but you know who you are. You might be on here. And I love how she put it. Some people can't really believe the affirmation, but you can believe in a declaration. You can declare it and bring it to yourself prayerfully one day. And the first one is, I bet you guys guessed it already, right? I am worthy. The second one, I am worthy of success, belonging, abundance, and prosperity. I am worthy of success, belonging, abundance, and prosperity. The next one, I am enough. You are. I am enough. The next one, I am capable. Because you are. You're already doing it. You are more than capable. And the last one, I am confident, ambitious, resourceful, and creative. I am confident, ambitious, resourceful, and creative. All right. Well, ladies, And gentlemen, I don't know if there are any gentlemen on here. I am so appreciative of you guys spending this time with me. I'm going to go into the questions. If you have questions on Facebook, put them in the comments so that I can respond to them. And please, please share your thoughts. This question is coming from Instagram, and it's from Condo Plant Mama. She says, my experience has been work environments are demonizing what I do or say when I'm trying to communicate concerns. And that's exactly what I was speaking of when we are actually trying to have those conversations to share our experiences, share what we're feeling, share what we're thinking. We more than likely get gaslighted, or as in Condo Plant Mama said, was that she feels like she's being demonized, as if her feelings are not valid, as if she's not sane about it, as if, you know, that's definitely not what you felt. That's not fair. That's a huge example of gaslighting, and more than likely also some tone policing. And when those things happen, it's tough to deal with them, because we, as Black people, we recognize microaggressions more so than anybody will ever say. And a lot of times it always comes back to, why does it always have to come back to race? Why does it always come back to race? Because when you're privileged, you don't think about the fact that it is about race. Seriously, it is. And when we are saying that, it's because you have used terms that are denoting that it has something to do with race. It's not because we're making this up. Believe me, we really wish that we did not have to have these conversations. We really wish that racism was not a thing, but it is. And because it is a thing, as Toni Morrison amply said, racism will cease to exist when it is no longer profitable or psychologically useful. Until that happens, we're going to still have those conversations, and we're going to say when it's something that is racist, we are going to bring it to your attention. No more allowing it to slip past, or allowing or being quiet and going into ourselves. We are going to use our voice, use our power, and call people out on that mess. Because the only way it's going to stop is to continue to call people out, and to have allies who are willing to do the calling out as well, but not just simply call people out, hold them accountable and responsible. Because if only thing we're doing is calling people out, but we're not holding them accountable and responsible for their actions, what's the point? Next question. Successful failure 3. How do you journal without overthinking? Good question. That is an awesome question. Actually, you can't really overthink with journaling. Your journaling is about how you are feeling. There is no right or wrong way to journal. There is nothing, I can't tell you that you should be writing this in your journal. You write what comes up and what comes out, what your heart is feeling, what you're holding inside your head that needs to come out. No one is going to critique it. What I do encourage, though, is that when you are journaling, is that you go back through your journal prompts of what you wrote over, say a couple of months later, and see how far you have come. See where you have changed, see where you have improved, see where there is still room for improvement. That's what journaling is about. It's not about you beating yourself up. It's not about you getting it right. It's about actually being able to take all of that out of your body and out of your mind and putting it on paper so that you can actually release some of the anxiety, release some of the stress, because our body is holding on to that. Remember, when we're going through traumatic experiences, our body is what's alerting us to that. Our brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus, our automatic nervous system, our sympathetic nervous systems, our parasympathetic nervous system, all of those things are at work. So our body is taking on all of that, the stress hormone, the cortisol, all of that. So journaling and other mindful tools such as meditation and breath work, yoga and things like that, those are the things that help to rid your body of some of those things that you've been holding on to, so that you can minimize the stress and anxiety on our bodies, because we only got this one body and we want to take care of our temple, right? Awesome. Great. I don't see any questions on Facebook. Any more questions here on Instagram? Again, I think the Rooted Peacock asked me a question. Do I have a website with pricing on my private sessions? I don't have pricing on my website, but you can book a free call by clicking the link in my bio. And I will also be happy to send you a link to schedule in DM. Pricing. Actually, I do have a pricing. I just actually put it up there because I didn't at first. I will send you that link as well. Private sessions are typically 60 minutes. They're usually $150. And we deep dive. The goal is to help you manage your thoughts and understand how your thoughts are creating your feelings are creating your emotions are creating your actions, and your actions are creating your results. I follow the model by Brooke Castile with the Life Coach School, and I love that model. Great. Oh, thank you, Kondo. Thank you, Davita. I appreciate it so much. Any questions, Facebook family? I have held you guys for a little over an hour, and I appreciate each of you that have stayed with me. If you found that any of this information was beneficial, please, 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 if you know someone who may benefit from this, please hit that share button. We're supposed to each one teach one, right? Sharing is caring. If we're going to be able to help our sisters to actually become and actuate their true authentic selves, and to be fearless, be unapologetic about who they are, owning their beauty, owning their power, let's make sure that this gets out to them so that they can actually understand what's really going on with them. Because when we think that imposter syndrome, which needs to be named something else, is about us, we take all of that on ourselves, and it's not all on us. And we need to be able to put some of that back where it belongs, into the work environments, to the people who are making decisions about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for Grace Journey. I'm going to sign off because I want to finish my tea. And I have just had an awesome time, and I need to go. And yeah, you keep getting kicked off. Oh my goodness. Well, I am going to save it. So hopefully you can come back and take a look at it and journal. And I will also make sure that if I don't do it tonight, I will put the journal prompts and the affirmations in the comments on YouTube, Facebook, and also on Instagram. Okay. Awesome. I love you all. I thank you so much. But before I leave, remember this: continue to please, please, please plant those seeds that are going to propel you forward into creating and living the life that you truly deserve, and becoming the woman that you were always predestined to be. I know you can do it. I believe in you. And if you need any help in doing that, in uncovering and managing your thoughts, dealing with imposter syndrome, any of those things, please, please, please don't forget to hit the link in my DM. If you're on in my bio, if you're on Instagram, and I'm going to type it in the comments as well. All right. I love you all. I hope you have a great rest of your evening on purpose. Be blessed.